Fear. What is it, and why do we have it? Fear is the uneasy feeling that we are all aware of, telling us of some danger. It's unsettling and encourages action. Along with a host of biological factors, fear directly contributes to our fight-or-flight response, the need to either run away or to fight against a perceived danger. In our daily lives, we not only encounter pressing fears, like a cockroach scurrying across the floor, but longer, sustained fears, like a zombie apocalypse. In either case, fear stimulates a response. Fight against the zombies, or prepare your zombie shelter. Jump away from the cockroach, or step on it. But oftentimes, we fear something that isn't even there. We may fear some movement on the ground because it could be a cockroach. And what are the odds of a zombie apocalypse? Slim. But that doesn't stop the fear. The errors can be broken into two categories, Type 1 and Type 2 errors. Type 1 errors are that potentially irrational fear, or fearing something that simply isn't there. A Type 2 error is just the opposite, not fearing something that actually is there. Imagine you are walking through the jungle. You come to a small river where you must cross in order to continue your journey. It's muddy in that river, and you cannot see clearly into it. The jungle itself is teeming with life, but you haven't come across any real danger yet. How do you cross that small river? Do you take the time and precaution to jump over the river or find another way around it? Or do you march right through the river? It's only a foot deep or so, and not very wide. If you chose to jump over the river, maybe it was because you thought there were snakes swarming in that murky water, when, in reality, there were no snakes to speak of. If that's the case, you've committed a Type 1 error. A Type 2 error-prone person would march right through that river, without a thought of the snakes. Of course, the odds of getting a snake bite during that crossing are pretty slim. But what if there actually was a snake? In that case, the first person, the Type 1 error-prone person, would have gotten through safe and sound, while the Type 2 error-prone person would be bitten. Natural selection selects more often the first, fearful person, who is safely across the river. Generations upon generations of Type 1 error-prone people who survive to create future Type 1 error-prone generations ultimately create a population that is naturally very fearful. But even the fear of snakes in a murky river in the jungle is not too irrational. So how do we get from fearing snakes to fearing a zombie apocalypse? Once someone has built up a Type 1 error to an extreme degree, a phobia is formed. Those oversized fears can stem from a variety of factors. Not the least of them is the influence of society and its culture. Interestingly, in just a matter of a few years, a society's culture can dictate a swing in its citizens' fears and phobias. One such example of this bizarre reality is the phobia of quicksand. Ask most Generation Xers what they feel the most as a child. Quicksand is likely to be an answer. One simple reasoning behind this phenomena is found in the appearance of quicksand in movies and pop culture at the time. In 1962, quicksand was featured in movies like Lawrence of Arabia and other Oscar winners like Women in the Dunes. In fact, a whopping 3%, or 1 in 35, of all movies made featured quicksand, truly a massive number. Simultaneously, the war in Vietnam was popularly being called a war of quicksand, or similarly, a quagmire. Cornell astronomers proposed that the lunar surface was comprised of powdery sand which might behave like quicksand. In 1963, Martin Luther King spoke of the quicksands of racial injustice in his I Have a Dream speech. So the genesis of such a phobia in the 60s is easy to construct. Whether or not the fear was real, it was certainly perceived, and a great type 1 error was formed. But how did that phobia fall? Today, children are virtually unafraid of quicksand. The fear of zombies is much more prevalent. In the media, quicksand is hardly ever used, and is almost always zany. Sandboxes, once ubiquitous across the nation, fell in the 90s as concerns of dangerous debris and disease degraded their demand. Consequently, young children didn't have access as readily to the amounts of sand created in the imagination of quicksand. And perhaps most crucially, shows such as Mythbusters and science journals such as Nature, along with the easy access of information through the internet, revealed that drowning in quicksand is essentially impossible. A once gripping type 1 error was relegated to instead a trivial concern. Now, let us focus on a problematic type 2 error that has cost many lives. Up until the very end of the 19th century, many people were unaware of the dangers of smoking. As we know, a type 2 error is one in which somebody does not fear something that actually is there. In this case, people did not suspect cigarettes of having carcinogenic properties. People did not limit their use of tobacco, and therefore, many died from lung cancer. The very real dangers of smoking were not observed, although they really were there. While all type 2 errors might not result in death, they certainly can be just as dangerous as a type 1 error. In the TOK curriculum, the principles that comprise type 1 errors and type 2 errors are not only relevant to fear, but to mathematics, sense perception, and the sciences. Professionals who fail to recognize a relationship between two factors in an experiment may be missing out on a crucial discovery that, in and of itself, is a classic type 2 error. A pedestrian who fails to look at traffic before crossing the street, assuming that street is safe, commits, once again, a type 2 error. A mathematician who declares a new formula or proof is correct when, in fact, it is incorrect, does a disservice to his mathematical community and commits a type 1 error. The TOK student will come across numerous cases of both type 1 and type 2 errors through their investigations of real-life situations, in both their daily lives and in academic study. The application of these errors in the student's work will aid substantially with critical thinking and analysis of real-life situations.